Hi, it's Lee. So today I'm colouring this cute little line from Camilla new colouring book, Pop Manga, Beauties and Beasties. If you haven't seen it yet, I've got a flip through and an extended review on my channel where I test out the mediums. Now, because I'm trying not to use my Prismacolors all the time, I've decided to colour this with Inktense pencils, and I might add some pencil on top if I need to, but I won't be using my Prismacolors. So the great thing about Inktense is that they're made up of ink and activated with water. The ink has a really strong pigment, so you don't need a lot. I'm using my set of 12 today, and although I've got the full set, I've been using this set of 12 for years. I've also got a little travel paint set as well, and I really must use that as well because sometimes it's far easier if you're doing something big to use the whole pan of paint rather than the pencil. They seem to last forever, these pencils, and I really must get on to cracking into that big set soon. And they're really versatile as well. If you haven't checked out the Inktense, I've used them before to paint on fabric, and there's a video somewhere here on that channel if you're interested in it. I actually painted on fabric, and I inadvertently washed it one day and didn't even realize, and it no color run, perfect. Just really can't speak highly enough of them. They're just so versatile. So I'll show you what I'm doing in real time, and so you don't get bored watching, I'll speed it up a bit if it's repetitive. So I thought, because I'm colouring a little line, that I should tell you a story about a line, and I did some digging and I came across a good one involving a lion and a mouse. So the story starts in South Africa, and in 1938 or 39, the sources are a bit differing, and it was there that Solomon Linda spent his days working full-time as a record packer at the Gallo Record Company in Johannesburg. Now, this wasn't his only job though. It was the only one that paid the bills. Gallo Record Company was the only record company at that time with a recording studio in South Africa. So although the work may not have been what he wanted, Solomon knew that the connections he made through his work would be helpful. His real love was music, and he even had a band called the Evening Birds that played local gigs. They made some money, but not enough to live on. He still needed that full-time work in order to make ends meet. Now, as luck would have it, the talent scouts at the Gallo Record Company, where Solomon Linda worked, discovered his talent that was right under their noses. And soon, Solomon Linda and the Evening Birds were recording at the studio that he worked at. And it was there that they came up with a song. Now, this song has such an incredible melody and beautiful lyrics. They named this song Mbube, and I apologise in advance to all my South African or Zulu speaking listeners that I may have butchered the name. Now anyway, Linda sold the copyright to Gallo Record Company, the place where he worked, and he sold it for just 10 shillings, which back then probably about $30. Now, some sources say that the fee that was negotiated was so low because Linda was actually illiterate. He was unable to read and understand the terms of the contract. I don't know whether that is true or not. And just as an aside, there are many people that need legal assistance that aren't able to read and understand contracts, and lawyers have ways of explaining that to them and certain forms that need to be signed. So even though people might not be able to read things themselves, they still should obviously get legal advice on it. Really imperative. Now, I don't know the situation in South Africa, But Solomon and Linda did not get legal advice on that contract. The song was released in South Africa, and I think you know where this story is going. It was a hit. Over 100,000 copies were sold. Now, this was back in 1939, and just in one country. This was a huge hit. Now, naturally, you would assume that Linda and the band would now be pretty comfortable. But the fact is, they didn't make any money off the song in royalties, as they'd already sold the complete rights. They still could play the song at gigs, but they only made the money that they made from playing the gig, which wouldn't have been much. A lot of bands worked for beer, and still do if you know any musicians. So although they could sing the song and they could have gigs, they weren't making any money from the sales of this record, from the fact that it was a hit in South Africa, from the 100,000 copies that were sold, from the times that it would be played on the radio. None of those royalties were coming their way. But this is just the beginning of the story of this song, because this story today is really about the song in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of other little sub-stories there as well. So far we have Linda with a hit song called Mbube, and although that name may not be familiar to you at this stage of the story, I bet you will know the song by the end of this story, and I wouldn't be surprised if it gives you an earworm like it has done for me. It is very catchy. Now, the song doesn't end there, which is why we have the story. The song Mbube went on to inspire a whole new form of African a cappella music called Izikatamiya, but most people just referred to it as Mbube after the song. Now, by the way, I'd love to know if you have guessed what song this is at this stage. And if you have a guess, put a comment below the video, and then I'd love to see, you come back and see if you were right or not. Anyway, by 1949, Mbube had expanded beyond Africa to the USA. And you're hitting it big when you hit the USA. Australian bands always want to hit it big in the USA. And I imagine South African ones would just be the same as well. Now, rumours are the copy of the album of Mbube was in a stack that was given to folk singer Peter Seeger. Now, when he heard the album, the song Mbube appealed to him so much that he was inspired by it to work with his band The Weavers on an adaptation of the song Mbube. Now, the song was released in the 50s, and just like with Solomon and Linda, the song was a hit. But this time, its name was Mbube. Now, it turns out that they actually misheard the lyric or misunderstood it on Mbube, and they thought it was Uwimbawe, and that's why they named their song Wimbawe, because that's what they were hearing. Now, Uwimbawe is Zulu actually for here's the line, but the world got Wimbawe. And by now, you might have guessed what the song is. Now, Pete Seeger and the Weavers are said to have assumed that this was an old African folk song that was actually in the public domain, meaning anyone could use it and therefore there was no breach of copyright that would occur. But their representatives never actually formally checked. Now, if they had, they would have realised that the copyright was owned by Eric Gallo of Gallo Records in South Africa, the guy who had bought it for 10 shillings years earlier. So, in the end, they did a deal with Gallo Records, and Solomon Linda was credited for the song, and he was paid the princely sum of $1,000. and Pete Seeger instructed his publishers to give whatever was earned to Linda. Unfortunately, that never happened, and no one followed up and checked. So far, Solomon Linda had earned $1,000 and 10 shillings for a song that was a hit in 2 countries, but it didn't end there. And now there's more to that Pete Seeger story as well, with things in a different name, but I don't want to add to the complexity of this story. By 1961, another band emerged in the USA called the Tokens, and they were spitballing ideas for an album, and one of them members suggested a cover of Mbube. Now they brought in a lyric writer, George Weiss, to give a lyrical restyle and introduce some lyrics in English. Now, of course, it was retitled in this new package as the song we all know, The Lion Sleeps Tonight. Now, The Lion Sleeps Tonight was actually the B-side of the single. For those that don't remember singles, usually when a band released a song, it was on a small record called a single. And the catchy song, or the one that they felt would be a hit in the charts, which was basically a ranking of songs that were released every week and how popular they were on the A side, or the top of the record as presented in the packaging. Now, the A side for the Tokens was a song called Tina. Now, do you remember it? I doubt it, because it didn't get any airplay much on the radio at all. But when the radio DJs turned the record over, turned the single over and played the B-side with The Lion Sleeps Tonight on it, it became a #1 hit. And actually, it was their only #1 hit. They were a bit of a one-hit wonder band, but not that song, not that lyrical restyle, not The Lion Sleeps Tonight. Anyway, so far we've had 2 hit records in the US from this song, or a derivative of it as it's called in copyright law, and 1 hit record in the original form in South Africa. So 3 times, and still Solomon Linda is in South Africa, poor and without the trappings that you would expect from 3 #1 songs. Now, he was soon to have another blow. At the time the song was released, the copyright laws would have actually reverted back to Linda's family 25 years after his death. But that changed when South Africa made new copyright laws after they declared independence from the British colonies in the 60s. Now, it wasn't long after that Solomon Linda actually died in 1962. And at the time of his death, despite these 3 hit songs, 2 of which were derived from his original composition, he had very little money. According to one source, the family was so broke that they could not afford a tombstone for him for 18 years. But the story doesn't end there. It's just warming up. After Solomon Linda's death in 1983, the American music publishing company called Folkways actually paid $1 to assign the rights for the renewal of Mbube. That was the one by Pete Seeger and the Weavers, under copyright law from Solomon Linda's wife, Regina. And not just for the US, but they wanted worldwide rights. Now remember that this family was poor. They didn't understand how music copyright works. They hadn't had a lawyer inspect this copyright contract and advise them. They were removed from the world of US music charts, living in South Africa in what has been described as abject poverty. Their father, who was a musician, didn't understand the complexities of contracts either. And even if he had, he was illiterate. It would have been an extremely difficult situation to be in. And like many musicians, he was probably more interested in the music than in all this other stuff that comes with it. The family of Solomon Linda living in South Africa were living in extremely poor conditions, because in reality this song that had already made others famous and produced number one hits wasn't benefiting them at all. So far they'd made $1,000, 10 shillings, and then that one extra dollar. So $1,001 and 10 shillings from a 3-hit wonder. So by the end of 1989, the copyright to The Lion Sleeps Tonight was due to expire, and George Weiss and his company intended to renew the copyright and republish the song on their own through the company called Abilene Music. Now, Regina died shortly afterwards in 1990, and Folkways were quick off the bat to try and negotiate the same deal with the two daughters who were the remaining family. So they paid out the hefty sum of another $1 for worldwide rights, meaning that they could use this song anywhere in the world. They were trying to ensure that the heirs of Solomon Linda would have no claim to the copyright of Mbube or any work derived from it, like the previous songs like Wimaway and The Lion Sleeps Tonight. They were derived from the original composition of Solomon Linda. Without it, those songs wouldn't have existed. It was the inspiration for it. Now, at this time, Solomon Linda's family in South Africa were oblivious to how much royalties were, and they had no understanding of the amount that they were entitled to. They were getting small checks, but they had no reason to question if these checks were representative of the amount that they were entitled to. They were extremely poor, and I'm sure these checks, although small, were incredibly welcome. Now, of course, a legal dust-up ensued, and that was in 1992 between Weiss and the weavers and the publishers Folkways. Weiss, of course, had provided those lyrics in English, and Folkways, of course, had assigned the original composition that it was based on. In the end, Weiss and his company won the rights to the song that they had adapted, The Lion Sleeps Tonight, and they agreed to pass down the line to the original composer, Solomon Linda, his share of the royalties, which they calculated to be about $12,000 over 10 years. Now, by 1994, the big player entered the scene. The big mouse, that is, Disney. Disney acquired a license from Abilene Music, which is George Weiss's company, to use The Lion Sleeps Tonight. Now, a license is just a right to do something like use the music that would otherwise be illegal. Now, as part of this license, Abilene Music also granted Disney an indemnity. Now, Disney released The Lion King, and in that, two of the characters sing The Lion Sleeps Tonight. So far the song that had made everyone who sung it a hit, and it was no different now. In fact, the popularity with the Disney film would have been huge. Now, Disney did have a right to use the song as they'd negotiated this license with Abilene Music, which was George Weiss's company, and he was the one who wrote those English lyrics, the song that's probably stuck in your head right now. The song was in the movie, it was in the video on TV, but it wasn't actually on the album soundtrack for the movie. And it's estimated that this would have generated at least $16 million in royalties for the song. Now, meanwhile, back in South Africa, the daughters of Solomon Linda finally realised how much this song was worth. You see, Rolling Stone magazine, which has some really great writers on staff, including journalist Rianne Milan, wrote an article on the whole copyright shebang that I've been talking about through this story. In it, it was pointed out that all of these top hits were derivatives of the original Mbube, which had made millions. and claimed that the song used in Just the Lion King would have generated that $15 to $16 million. In South Africa, there was an outcry. Support came out in full force at the unfairness of it all for the remaining Linda family. One of the daughters had recently died of AIDS, and those that were living were doing it tough. They hadn't reaped any significant rewards from this iconic song that their father wrote. Now, it was the boost that was needed, not only to fight for their father's acknowledgement as the creator of the original song and its link to South Africa, but also to gain royalties from the derivative works that were created from his original work. Now, it was in the early 2000s that the remaining members of the Linda family finally took action. They hired a South African copyright lawyer called Owen Dean, who really knew his copyright stuff, and he's still in practice today. Now, just for a little background, when a country is colonised, it takes so much of the law of the country that is required. So even though South Africa was no longer a British colony after 1961, the law that was relevant at the time that the song was created was not the current law. It was law imposed in 1939, which was imperial law. Now, even though the song The Lion Sleeps Tonight is not the same as Mbube, it was Mbube, the original work, that was the basis for the new work, which is what is known as derivative work, meaning it's derived from an existing work. Now, digging into the statutes, Owen found a reversion provision. So where an author assigned his copyright during his lifetime, 25 years after his death, the copyright reverted, went back to the executor of his estate as an asset in that estate, notwithstanding any other assignments of copyright which might have taken place in the meantime. Basically, what that means for the Linda heirs was, even though the copyright had been assigned for $1 previously, not once but twice, the rights still reverted back to them 25 years after the death of their father. Not only that, the law states that the executor had to transfer it to them, and it doesn't become their property until it does. Now, that never happened. So the effect of that meant that the assignments made by Solomon's widow, Regina, for $1, and their children, again, for $1, had no legal effect. So in order to claim their rights, the estate of Solomon Linda had to be reopened because he had been dead since 1962, and executors had to be appointed in 2004 to administer that estate. Now, this needed to be done to ensure that the litigation could be brought. You can't just go to court if you don't have standing, a right to be in court. So you have to go through this process, even though it might seem kind of convoluted. So as they were relying on an English bit of law from imperial times, they could have actually sued in the UK, but ultimately they decided to do so in South Africa, possibly because of convenience sake. But of course, this raised another problem. In South Africa, the court only has jurisdiction over businesses or those with assets in South Africa. Now, this is probably because if the person bringing the action, the plaintiff, wins, they need to enforce it to get money or property. And if they have no assets in that country, they wouldn't be able to enforce any court judgment. Now, Abilene Music, the company that had rights to the English lyrics, because it was the company owned by George Weiss who wrote those lyrics, under South African law, they would need to have assets in South Africa. Now, they're a US-based company and they didn't meet that criteria. Now, Disney actually had licensed the music, meaning they had a right to use it in terms of the license. But the problem was, all of that shebang that we talked about earlier Because of South African copyright law, at the times the right to the derivative works was still with the executor. They hadn't been transferred to the heirs of Solomon Linda. So whilst Disney didn't own any land or commercial businesses in South Africa, they did own something that is considered to be an asset. Disney had actually registered over 200 trademarks in South Africa, and so they were able to proceed with the lawsuit as those trademark registrations are assets, and they added Abilene music to the mix as they had a license to use the music, and they had granted Disney that license and promised to indemnify them, to cover them. Now, of course, the big mouse didn't take this laying down and immediately asked the court to set aside the application, but the mouse lost this round. The matter was set to go to trial in February 2006, and it must have been an incredibly worrying time for the heirs of Solomon Linda. They were poor, they were in a legal stoush with a company with huge pockets, a team of lawyers, and a reputation in the legal world for fighting it out. Now, they were asking for 1.6 million, which is not a lot, considering the amount that this song has generated and would generate. By 2006, a settlement out of court was reached. Now, that basically means that the parties didn't go to court and fight it out and leave it up to a judge to make an award for how much they should get, or if anything. They decided to settle it out of court, just negotiate something between them, rather than going to the expense of running this through and proving the case and bringing evidence and all of that. It's always a risk going to court. It could go either way. So as part of that settlement, it included Solomon Linda as composer for the song, so he was credited to The Lion Sleeps Tonight. And it was acknowledged that the original was a derivative of his song, Mbube, and an acknowledgement that the cultural basis of the song was rooted in South Africa, not the US, like many people thought. As part of that settlement, a trust was set up to provide and receive royalty payments from the past use and future use of The Lion Sleeps Tonight. So The Lion Sleeps Tonight has been recorded by over 150 artists. It's featured in at least 14 movies and musicals. It's been translated into 10 languages. So 60 years after Solomon Linda recorded a song that's produced gold for everyone that touched it, it was finally able to reap the rewards for his family. So that's it for the Lion and the Mouse case. I forgot to mention while I was colouring that I made a big whoopsie on my page. You may have noticed. I originally thought I would do a mottled blue background with Inktense and glitter, and it really didn't work out. I wasn't liking it, plus I tried using my stamp pad and forgot to wash out the black that was previously on it, and of course it marked the paper. So there was only one thing for it: get out the black acrylic paint, add a bit of glitter to it, and paint the whole background. So that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed the story of The Lion Sleeps Tonight. I would love to know if you guessed the song at the beginning, and isn't it great that Solomon Linda's family finally were able to benefit from a song that has touched so many. That's it from me. Until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.